Hello and welcome to Cargo Shorts, brought to you by Old Dominion Freight Line. I'm your host, Jonathan Betz, and today we're going to talk about using digitalization in transportation, the latest trends, and how it can lead to enhanced visibility and transparency. We'll discuss how clarity can lead to benefits such as improved planning, better communication, more sharing of information, and most importantly, increased trust between companies and customers. Joining me to talk about this is Todd Polen, Vice President of Pricing Services at Old Dominion Freight Line, and Scooter Sayers, President of Sayers Logistics and LTL Consultancy. Great to have you both with us.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So, Scooter, it's clearly important to get it right, but transparency is also a big factor in all this. So explain to me, how precisely can digitization help improve the transparency in business operations?
Yeah, I think for starters, I think it will help to kind of define some terms here. I've been thinking about this, and we're talking about visibility, we're talking about transparency, we're talking about trust. What does all that mean? So I think from a transportation standpoint, visibility means I have the data, I have the information that you want. It's here, I can see it, we can see it. Transparency, it's not the same thing. What transparency means is not only do I have the data, but I'm willing to share it with you. I'm willing to give it to you. And I think trust comes in because once I have the data and I'm willing to share it with you, trust is you believe my data. And so I think it kind of helps to understand those definitions. It all comes down to trying to have facts in your hands rather than anecdotes, having a field, normalized data that you can actually work with. And when you have transparency, when you have visibility through digitization, that's going to help you reduce errors. It's going to help you get big data fast in the fields that you need to operate with. It turns events and exceptions into actionable data that you can actually work with, and it promotes standardization. So when I think about this and I think about some examples of that, one simple example is just with a shipper creating their bill of lading. Where is that address information coming from for the consignee? Are they having to retype it from someplace else, or is it already digitized in their TMS or their CRM so they can just automatically pull that in to the bill of lading?
Talk about those examples again. Let me hear more.
I can tell you kind of what I think of as kind of a funny example of this digitization. Just thinking back to my early days with the carrier I worked at. I've been in the industry for a while, and when I first started, it was the way that shipments were updated as they traveled across a dock from door to door. It was all done with paper. So you hear today about an item having a digital twin. Well, what we had back then was a travel copy. It was an analog twin. It was an analog representation of the shipment. And as shipments were moved from trailer to trailer, those travel copies were aggregated, brought into the office, and somebody would manually update the status of the shipments. And it would take hours between the actual movement of the freight and the update of the freight. And a lot of data errors were made. And then I saw us switching to putting barcodes on the travel copies. That automated the process, that digitized the pro number, but it didn't digitize enough of the rest of the information. So it helped, but it didn't get you where you needed to be. And now we live in an environment where you have a lot of carriers are using PDAs on the dock. The data about the shipment is completely digitized on the PDA. And as the forklift driver is moving the freight from door to door, staging it, loading and unloading it, every time an action takes place, it's being updated live as it happens, and everybody within the company can see that. So that to me is what digitization does, is it just makes everything very visible and very transparent.
Let's talk about the history of the trucking industry, because historically it's been paper-centric, it's labor-intensive, but that has been changing. So we've talked about this on the podcast before, about how this is an ongoing issue for shippers and carriers. How have you seen digitization grow recently? And tell us, how critical has that shift been?
For us, we've really been pushing getting the bill of lading in, because obviously it all starts there. Operations can't really move freight effectively without a few 5 critical pieces of information that are on that bill. And of course, we need to eliminate keystrokes on our end because we're going to make errors, and errors cost money. So we've definitely seen a trend in that, but we've also seen a rise of the reference numbers. There's lots of accounts out there now that have unique reference numbers that they use internally to charge things to their general ledger for various divisions, companies, business segments, et cetera, et cetera. And all those things can be on the bill of lading and associated with the shipment. So it's very important that we get it right so that they know where to charge it internally and pay us. And we get a lot of payment issues, believe it or not, not only from keying things wrong manually, but also these reference numbers that also drive freight payment. And the main thing that we as a carrier want to do is we really need to capture that data in a defined field. So if it's in a defined field, we can then create a data lake and start cross-referencing various things and associate them with various customers and processes. And all that data needs to be in a field where we capture it and define it. And that makes us a lot more effective in the future as a carrier.
The NMFTA announced last fall there will be a new single standard eBOL coming this July. So can you give us some insights on how that will benefit the industry? And I want to hear, how is OD responding to this?
This was a good initiative by NMFTA. They actually took ownership of it, which it makes sense because the uniform bill of lading resides in their book, their classification. So it makes good sense that they did that. But the thing that's unique about what they've done is they've actually reached out to various 3PLs and shippers to get input from all sides. It's not just a carrier-driven thing. It's an industry-driven thing. So the beauty of it is this one standard will be available for anybody. So that makes it a lot more cost-effective for small customers or large customers to integrate with whatever carrier they choose. And guess what? The standard is there. We all know what it is. We all know what each field is and what data should apply in each field. So it's going to make everything easier in the long run and more cost effective. My only worry is it ends up like EDI, where it started out as a standard and then, quite honestly, we do a bunch of customization after the fact now. But anyway, this standard is going to be a good starting point for us. And we have already implemented and adopted the standard and have done the necessary things to make it happen at Old Dominion because we're obviously a core partner with a lot of customers who are already doing API bill of lading. So it's been a good thing, and it's kind of been nice to see the industry collectively as a whole agree on a standard, adopt it, and everyone pushing for it, realizing that it's necessary. So, there's hats off to several people. NMFTA has done a good job with it. Paul Dugent has spearheaded it there. But, we've also gotten support from SMC, and Project 44 actually started the initiative way back when with a meeting in Chicago. So there's been a lot of people that have been involved in making it happen, and it's going to be good for the industry.
Scooter, what do you think? Is it going to be good for the industry? A game changer?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be great, and I really appreciate, like what Todd said, NMFTA kind of taking over the challenge here. They're the perfect vehicle for this. They're LTL focused. They've got a long history of setting standards. And like Todd noticed, they already work with all of the constituents here. They work with the shippers. They work with the carriers. They're bringing them together. They work with the 3PLs, who are an incredibly important part of making the electronic bill of lading happen. And the NMFTA embraces technology, so they're a perfect vehicle for it. And it's if it can be done right and really thrive, this is going to be a really good thing. I mean, you think about it. With an electronic bill of lading, you have the opportunity for the carrier to get visibility and transparency into the freight they're about to pick up. Those 5 key data points that Todd was talking about. They can get that data before the driver even arrives to pick up the freight. So you've got a situation where the carrier can begin optimizing and planning their day and tomorrow before they pick up the freight. They can literally rate the freight bill. If the data is going to be accurate, they can literally rate the freight bill before they even pick up the freight. And you're advancing that transparency and visibility way forward, which helps everybody out.
But Scooter, when you talk about new technology and changes, I imagine people think costs. So how can digitization help control the business cost?
Yeah, I think You can't control a cost unless it's visible to you, right? Just like you hear, you can't do anything with something unless you can measure it, right? And you got to be able to measure cost. You got to be able to see cost to be able to control it. Digitization is a force multiplier. It allows you to gather that big data really fast, really quick, and make use of it if you can get that data into normalized, standardized fields. When you think about a carrier, what are the two biggest costs for a carrier? I think it's labor. I think it's fuel. So with digitization, you're able to do more with less. You're able to grow without having to add proportional cost to it through the use of digitalization. It lets you scale. That's important. When you think about having that data, that big data that you need, getting all that data as quickly as you can, that allows a carrier to do things like optimize their line haul every day, optimize their delivery every day. That's going to help them save fuel. And as a carrier can reduce their costs by saving fuel, by not having to add labor as they grow, they can offer better pricing to their customers. So it's a win-win for everybody to be able to do that.
And so, Todd, what has OD been doing to help shippers digitize their operations?
Couple things. I'm going to use our Spot Pick app as an example. It actually ties into the electronic bill of lading. We have a Spot Pick app that we have several customers use. I said several. We actually have 30 or 40 now, and it's growing. And this app is basically it's an unloading manifest. We get the data, those 5 elements that we need to work freight immediately. So that's pieces, handling units, origin, destination, zip code, and weight. And on that app, the customer can either scan, barcode, the pro number in the system. As they load it on the trailer, we have that data. And the beauty of it is we can get it in real time. And that could even tie into the electronic bill of lading, because obviously if they sent us the bill of lading, we could populate the app with the data. But my point is we're reducing keystrokes. More importantly, we're not having to have someone manually key that data in back at our terminal to create an unloading manifest so that we can work the freight and get it moving so it can meet service schedules. And that's saving a bunch of money. And you tie that in with electronic bill of lading, those are the type of things that we're doing, that will also help us once we see freight that's coming sooner because it's on the app and they hit enter and they say, come get it. They no longer have to call us either. We know to go get it and swap a trailer and get things moving. It also helps us with potentially in the future, better line haul visibility, because we'll actually know where freight's going sooner and we don't have to scramble like crazy like we do now to make things get to where it needs to go and get there on time. So there's a lot of things like that taking the keystrokes out of the equation, just like Scooter said about the transparency and visibility. It'll help everyone along the line. It'll make a better service product. You'll have less issues, and carriers will actually be able to be more proactive. That's one thing that's a weakness in our industry. Generally, carriers don't do a good job telling customers, oh, by the way, there's been a serious accident, or your freight's going to be 2 days late, or, who knows what happened at the consignee. Maybe they're backed up and can't get things. We don't do a very good job as an industry with proactive notification. So all those things have the ripple effects of improving things in the supply chain.
So, Scooter, as we talk about this transition, I also want to talk about incentives, because sometimes it seems like incentives might be necessary for some folks. I know that you and some of your other industry colleagues have endorsed an idea around the shipper scorecard. So first, can you tell me about that and explain how it could help carriers and shippers in the future?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's missing too often in the relationship between shippers and carriers is having a real dialogue about what the issues are. One of the challenges, one place where friction comes into play with things like digitization is cost, to be honest. So if you've got a situation where you're having to absorb most of the cost and I'm going to get most of the benefit, you can't move forward with that, right? And it's very common to have a situation like that within a partnership or relationship. It's not always the case where both sides can easily share in the cost and benefit or have the same cost benefit situation. So when you've got one party that really is going to have to absorb the cost for another party to absorb the benefit, you've got to figure out a way to spread that amongst both sides. And one way you can do that is to have a scorecard where the carrier can identify the various things that they see that the shipper might be able to do or change, or the things that the shipper is doing well, the things the shipper is not doing well, that can help with the operation on the carrier side. So these may be some things that the shipper would have to change, may have to incur some cost to do. So it comes down to the fact, how can we use the scorecard, have the conversation, and find those ways where we can work together to share in that cost and that benefit, so that there's that incentive for both of us to work together to make it happen.
Yeah, more of that communication and feedback, it sounds like, too. So, I mean, Todd, what do you think about this idea of a shipper scorecard? Good idea?
I like it. We've actually adopted, I think we've got it about with 10 or 12 customers now, a digital scorecard. In other words, how well are they doing integrating with us digitally? Are we getting bill ladings digitally? And if we are, what is the quality of the data that we get? So we actually have a digital scorecard, but I like Scooter's idea even better, which is why stop there? Why not have a scorecard on all the other things that are going on daily in the operation, in addition to just getting the data digitally and make improvements that way? You know, customers have had a carrier scorecard forever. A lot of things on there can be interesting, especially when it comes to on-time service and some other things that they look at, including filed claims, paid claims, and things like that. But to Scooter's point, I think, honestly, the scorecard probably needs to be expanded. I think it would actually benefit everyone. And I think Scooter's correct. Both sides have to see the benefit of those things and some of those changes. And I think it's probably would be an effective way to A, ramp up communication, and B, come up with ways other than just always talking about price to drive costs out of the thing. And both sides may actually benefit from reduced costs. So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I like that key point of ramping up communication, which seems so necessary at times here. So, Scooter, I know you work with a lot of carriers and a lot of shippers. Help me understand, where is the friction when it comes to embracing this new technology?
Well, we just talked about cost. I think cost is a big piece, right? Especially when you've got one side has to bear more of the cost than the other. How do you work that out? I think lack of incentive is another one. So I think that comes into play with education. So the lack of incentive, the incentives are there. It's educating the parties on the incentives. Inertia is friction. The adage of I've always done it this way, why would I want to change? So I think those are some of the key areas of friction are, the cost and how we share the cost and share the benefit, and make sure that we communicate the incentive, that convince the shippers that by doing something, they are truly going to benefit from that. I think those are pretty key.
I mean, I get also that this is a big business decision. I mean, implementing new technology, as you point out, it doesn't come without a cost. So I can see how it can be a challenging move for small businesses. But Todd, how have you seen that play out with small shippers considering this change? I mean, what have you found most important for them to consider here?
Well, a lot of small customers, they obviously don't have robust IT departments. However, it's become pretty inexpensive these days for customers to get a functional TMS. There's a lot of solutions out there. Various carriers are peddling different things. 3PLs also have some good solutions. So I think it's actually easier, in my experience, for the small customer to benefit from TMS and automation than some of the larger customers. And the reason larger customers can be a bigger problem is typically they're on multiple systems. They might be several companies within one company. You might have 2 or 3 different WMS systems, for example. You might even have 2 or 3 different accounting systems going on. So it's actually a little bit more difficult, in my experience, for the larger customers to make big changes. A lot of times you have to do it division by division or location by location. And it's actually a little bit easier, I think, for the small customer to integrate and automate and digitize, to be quite honest.
They're not as nimble, I'm assuming, as the big ones?
Right. And then it becomes back to Scooter's point, which is, okay, I'm a large company. I'm going to do this. What's the ROI for me? I've had one company tell me it was going to cost them 6 figures. Well, then they come their hand out to me saying, are you going to pay for that? Well, no, I'm not going to finance your IT costs, but we can talk if we get to the benefit and I can actually use your data. So it's one of those things that I think as a carrier industry, we're going to have to be more receptive to that and do a better job integrating with that. But back to my point, I still think the small customer, your original question, I think they actually can integrate with us a lot of times easier than the big guy. But as a carrier industry, we're going to have to do a better job integrating with everybody if we want to be successful.
So, Scooter, you talked about the incentives, but overall, what can be done here to try to convince more shippers to get on board with this?
I think a lot of it starts with the bill of lading, like what Todd mentioned. Everything starts with the bill of lading with the shipment. That is the key foundational piece. And if that's not right, then the whole transaction starts falling apart on you. So I think it starts with the bill of lading quote, or what that customer expectation is in the invoice. It's marrying all those three together so that they're all uniform. The simple fact of the matter is we have too many invoices out there in the LTL world where the invoice that comes in from the carrier, it doesn't match what the shipper was expecting. It doesn't match their quote. There's too many reways, too many reclasses, too many accessorials that are not accounted for on the front end. And that just puts a lot of friction into the situation, puts a lot of sand into the gears. Shippers that see the discrepancies coming through, they're going to fight or challenge them if they think they're wrong. And that just adds a lot of administrative expense to the problem, to the situation. And then what's really interesting to me is that there are a lot of shippers that don't even know these invoice discrepancies are happening. They don't realize that there are reways or reclasses or accessorials being added. And they're trying to pass their freight cost on to the customer, but they're really not. There's a hole in their operation. So I think that's a great place to start, is incentivizing everyone to pull out all of these exceptions, all of this friction, all of this sand in the gears, and eliminate this administrative burden for everyone. I think that's a great place to start.
I mean, it's probably going to be a long journey, I'm assuming, and it's clearly tough work. So, Todd, looking at the big picture here, I mean, where do you think the industry is headed when it comes to transparency and pricing?
Scooter nailed it. As a carrier industry, we've done a great job getting every dollar we can out of every shipment. And he's right. It's through accessible charges, reways, inspections. Everyone has dimensioners now. So we know what the correct charges should be, finally. When I first started in this industry 30 years ago, we didn't know and didn't charge for half the stuff. That's not the case. But what that's done is it's created a freight payment industry that's probably the largest single cost in the supply chain today. It's out of control. So the future, as it relates to transparency, is we're going to have simplified pricing. I think we're going to go the other extreme, which is now that we know all these things that are happening and we know what the customer's doing, and we can collect data on that by customer, by location, however we need it, we should be able to price it that way, give you one price just like you would when you buy an airline fare. And that's the price you pay when you ship, as long as you're going where you said you were, and within a certain tolerance, your weight and your cube is somewhat accurate. And since we know the address, we know what accessory charges we can expect as well. And that's where we're going. I think that'll be the future. And it's going to be a sad day for freight payment agents, maybe in 10 or 15 years, because you won't need them. The person who actually ships the shipment will actually have something entered in their accounting system, and it should match 90% of the time, kind of like it does in the truckload market. So that's where it's going. That's where it needs to go. We see that here at Old Dominion, so we're planning for it.
All right, Scooter, final thoughts? Put it together. Why is transparency important for building trust?
Part of it comes down to the incentive game here. I think if we can make sure that the incentives are done right, it's going to help everybody out. The carriers all, by and large, want to get accurate data from the shipper as quickly as they can. That's what they all want. That's what they all need. Shippers, if they have the proper incentives to do that, they're going to find ways to make it happen. You think about our environment we're in today, it's a soft environment. But not too long ago, business was pretty tight. So you had a lot of carriers struggling to deliver the freight that they had, having to make tough decisions on what they could pick up, what they could get delivered. That time is going to come back again. It's natural in LTL. It's going to happen. And if I'm a shipper and I want to make sure that I'm serviced properly by my carriers, how am I going to do that? One way is it's going to be embracing digitization, embracing transparency, and making sure I'm getting the carriers the data I need as quickly as I can, and accurate data as quickly as I can. That's going to allow me to ensure that I'm going to get my freight service, my freight picked up and delivered. So I think that's pretty key.
Well, we are certainly at an inflection point here. Todd, Scooter, great conversation. Thank you both for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there are a lot of reasons clearly to share more information, ranging from better planning to better prices. It benefits all parties to work together to improve transparency, efficiencies, and trust. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our full Cargo Shorts podcast series. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, SoundCloud, and Google Podcast. Visit the OD Outlook section on odfl.com. It's linked in the show notes to find additional information and materials on this topic. Thanks for listening.